Forget the familiar images of predators. Forget wolves, lions, and bears. Forget the idea that after the extinction of the dinosaurs, the world became safer, because the Cenozoic era was not an age of peace. It was a world of new monsters, a world in which creatures appeared that were created not for balance, but for domination. And among them was Amphicyon, not a dog and not a bear, but something much worse, a hybrid of strength, mass, and brutality. A predator weighing up to 800 kilograms that did not simply hunt, but systematically destroyed everything that could not escape or defend itself. A creature that stood above all other carnivores, controlled territories, crushed bones, knew no fear, and had no natural enemies. And it would seem that such a perfect survival machine should have left a lineage for millions of years. But reality turned out to be different, because this super predator disappeared completely, without descendants, without heirs, and without a chance of return. And today, we will figure out how a creature that was the peak of evolution of its time lost to the future, and why even absolute power does not guarantee immortality. The story of Amphicyon begins not with legends and not with myths, but with the cold soil of 19th century Europe, when the world did not yet know that beneath its feet were hidden the remains of creatures capable of overturning the understanding of carnivore evolution. In 1835, the French paleontologist Édouard Lartet came across strange bones that did not fit into any group of animals known at that time. It was not a bear, because the proportions were too predatory, and not a dog because the mass and structure of the skeleton indicated a completely different level of power. Science was faced with a creature that looked like a mistake of nature, like a fusion of two different worlds. And that is why it received the name Amphicyon, which literally means double dog. But this name was misleading, because Amphicyon was not twice a dog. It was many times more terrifying than any dog. It combined the flexibility, endurance, and hunting instinct of canids with the mass, strength, and bone-crushing power of bears. And with each new discovery, it became obvious that this was not a single species, but an entire dynasty of super predators that for millions of years ruled different continents, leaving behind only broken bones and traces of absolute domination. To understand where Amphicyon came from, we need to roll back in time to the moment when the dinosaurs were already gone, but the world still did not belong to any stable predator. It was a chaotic period after a global catastrophe when ecosystems were broken. Niches were empty, and the rules had not yet been formed. And it was then that small mammals appeared, resembling martens or large mice, which we today call miacids. They were not strong, not fast, and not dominant, but they had one advantage: evolutionary flexibility. Their teeth changed, becoming sharper, their jaws strengthened, their bodies slowly increased in size, and generation after generation, these inconspicuous creatures began to occupy the role of predators in a world that had not yet recovered from extinction. They experimented with shape, mass, and hunting style until one branch took the path of raw power. And it is from this moment that the story of the Amphicyons begins, because evolution was no longer looking for balance. It was looking for maximums, maximum mass, maximum bite force, maximum control over prey. And when these animals reached a critical point, they began to move beyond a single continent. There is a hypothesis that early Amphicyon managed to move from North America to Europe, not by land, but via temporary floating islands of vegetation formed after storms that carried entire ecosystems across the Atlantic. And if this is true, it means that these predators were so resilient that they could survive weeks or months in the open ocean to reach a new continent and once again take the top of the food chain. When Amphicyons reached Europe, they were no longer just large mammals, but creatures that combined the strength of a bear, the speed and flexibility of a wolf. Massive Amphicyon major and gigantic Amphicyon giganteus, weighing up to 800 kilograms, dominated the forest plains. Their teeth were not just sharp. They were made for crushing bones, for tearing spines, for breaking skulls, and thanks to such anatomy, they could hunt any prey that crossed their path. From large herbivores to solitary mammals, their paws were simultaneously powerful and maneuverable, allowing them to stalk and catch prey, while the body was resilient, capable of enduring long chases, and the tail and neck muscles provided precision strikes. The entire skeleton structure spoke of absolute specialization in killing. And more importantly, Amphicyon did not hunt chaotically. They applied strategy, combining strength, speed, and intelligence to minimize risk and maximize results. And it was exactly this combination of traits that made them the pinnacle of predation in Europe for millions of years, until new competitors began to appear, and until they were forced to enter the evolutionary Great Game, where only the most adapted would survive. While European giants dominated their continents, in America their own Amphictyons developed, such as Daphoenodon. Built for fast hunting on open prairies, their bodies were lighter than their European relatives, but they compensated with incredible speed, sharp teeth, and the ability for long chases. They acted like wolves, or even cheetahs, capable of driving herbivores for kilometers. And when climate changes and continental drift opened the Bering Strait, European superpredators began migration into America, crossing rivers, valleys, and possibly temporary islands, encountering a new ecosystem and new enemies. And this Great War between European giants and local American Amphictyons lasted millions of years. Each battle, each hunt, was a struggle for survival, where victory went not only to the stronger, but to those who adapted better to conditions. And over 2 to 3 million years, European species completely displaced the locals, secured control over territories, learned to avoid competition and disease, using not only strength but strategy, observation, and cooperation with relatives. And this process shows that evolution was not random. Survival was determined not only by size and teeth, but by the ability to adapt to new conditions, occupy new territories, and fight in the war of all against all, where no species could relax and no advantage guaranteed the future. Despite enormous strength, teeth, paws, and mental sharpness, Amphictyons could not withstand climate change, the cooling that began to destroy forests, turning them into open spaces suitable for fast, flexible, and narrowly specialized predators such as wolves, cats, and bears that gradually appeared on the continent. And although Amphictyons were masters of all trades, they were generalists, and evolution at that moment rewarded those who were narrowly specialized, those who could hunt more efficiently, those who could avoid disease and survive in smaller areas. And it was disease, epidemics to which large populations of Amphictyons were especially vulnerable, that finished off their greatness, because when one generation fell, the next could not quickly fill the gap. And over thousands of generations, millions of years of constant pressure, competition, and climate changes, the great empire of Amphictyons began to collapse. Territories shrank, competitors took places, once unreachable peaks became inaccessible, and although individual specimens continued to hunt and survive, it was already a shadow of former glory, the beginning of the end of an era where a creature that once ruled over all became marginal, weaker, vulnerable, and every day for it was a struggle for survival. And it was precisely because of these three factors, climate, competition, and disease, that Amphictyons, the magnificent giants of the Cenozoic era, disappeared forever, leaving only bones, tooth marks on skulls, and indisputable evidence that even absolute power does not guarantee immortality. When scientists began to analyze Amphictyon remains in detail, study teeth, bones, jaw structure, and even preserved muscle traces, it becomes clear that these creatures were not direct ancestors of modern predators. They did not give rise to wolves, cats, or bears, but were a kind of cousin grandfathers. An evolutionary experiment that almost succeeded. Their genes and morphology show that Amphicyons were extremely versatile, combining traits of predators from different lines. They could hunt enormous bodies, capture territories, survive in the most diverse conditions. But this versatility turned out to be also a weakness, because when the world changed, when the climate became harsher, when competition from narrowly specialized predators intensified, Amphicyon could not adapt fast enough to remain at the top, and their dynasty, which lasted millions of years, ended, leaving scientists only the opportunity to study bones, reconstruct behavior, assess bite force, and chase speed. To understand that evolution does not reward generalists in a changing world, and that even giants, which nature created as perfect hunting machines, can become marginal, vulnerable, doomed to extinction, leaving only traces of their existence and lessons for those living millions of years later, that strength, size, and versatility do not guarantee survival, and that even genetic potential, which seems perfect, can be crushed by time, disease, competitors, and climate, creating the drama of evolution that we can see only in the remains, teeth, and bones of Amphicyons. When we look at the bones of Amphicyons, at their teeth, skulls, and muscle traces, we see not just an extinct animal, but an entire era. An era where strength, intelligence, versatility, and mass created the pinnacle of predation. Yet even this did not guarantee eternity. We understand that the world is not made for any species to live forever, and that existence is a constant struggle where every day, every minute, every move can mean life or death. Amphicyons once dominated forest plains and prairies. They were the absolute rulers of their time, and now remain only as a lesson for us. A reminder that evolution is ruthless, that climate changes, competition, and disease can destroy even the strongest. And this makes us reflect on our own place in the world, on the fleetingness of time, and the inevitability of change. And when we like, subscribe to the channel and choose the topic of the next video. Whether saber-toothed cats or giant sloths, we are not just interacting with YouTube. We continue the story, observe, learn, and through thousands of generations, through millions of years, when someone opens the bones of these giants again, the story of Amphicyons will remind us that even the biggest, strongest, fastest, and smartest creatures, created by nature for absolute dominance, can disappear, leaving only traces of their existence. And it is precisely because of this understanding that we value life. Watch nature more closely, reflect on our own actions, on how we influence the world, and how the world influences us. And even in the simple act of watching a video, in each like, comment, or choice of the next topic, we become part of the great, endless story of life, which continues, changes, and never ends. And this makes our days important, our decisions meaningful, and our curiosity inexhaustible.